When you shortcut good and bad, you're missing out on a lot of that information. And instead, when we can start to understand emotions are messengers, it's just data. That's all it is, data coming in, right? So it's not touchy-feely. It's not a weakness. It's not anything. It's your brain processing and giving you really important information. Now, what you do with it's a different story, but I think that's such an important thing to really know.
You're listening to episode 197 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. Before we dive in today, I want to give a little background as to where we're going to be going. How many of you have been on social media and you've seen those posts and they're so well-intentioned? So I feel bad making fun of them, but I'm going to do it anyway. Those posts that say things like good vibes only, or those posts that tell you that even when you're feeling awful, we should push that aside and focus only on the positive. How many people have seen those posts? And in particular, how many times have you stumbled across something like that when you've legitimately been in a situation where you're like, no, I don't feel very good today. No, this thing that happened actually did really upset me, or I'm actually feeling kind of angry, or that was really hurtful. What happened? They can be even more impactful in not a great way when they're hitting us at a time when we're experiencing real emotion. And that's what we want to talk about this week on the podcast. We want to talk about specifically this idea in our society that certain emotions are off limits, or they are inappropriate, or that we shouldn't feel that way. Some people have talked about it in the realm of a word that I've heard, or a term that I've heard floating around, is toxic positivity. This is where we pretend like things are okay even when they aren't. This is very different. P.S. We can get into this in a whole different episode. Very different than positive psychology, as an aside. But anyway, toxic positivity, ignoring the fact that these more uncomfortable emotions are real and they do happen. So we're going to be diving into that today, but for a purpose. Not only to give you permission to feel every emotion that you may feel inclined or may feel come up in life, but also to talk about what happens if you do try to push those more uncomfortable emotions away. What you miss out on, valuable things that you miss out on by trying to avoid feeling angry or feeling guilty or feeling sad or feeling resentful or any of the things that we don't enjoy feeling. So we're going to be talking about that this week. But before we dive into that discussion, I want to mention a quick free resource. We've talked about it quite a few times, but I keep bringing it up because we're getting great engagement on it. We're getting great usage on it. And I know people are getting some great value out of it. So I want to make sure that we keep talking about it in case you haven't taken us up on this free resource yet. As we've all been going through a really challenging time I would be willing to bet every paycheck I get for the rest of my life that you have experienced at least one situation where you have felt like you're going to lose your proverbial, insert the SH word here, that you feel overwhelmed, or maybe you're feeling perfectionistic and you're getting down on yourself about how you're handling this really difficult situation that we're in, or you're just worried. You're worried about what the future might hold and how things are going to turn out for your family or the nation or anything else that you might be worried or anxious about. Because those feelings and those experiences are so common and so natural, how human of you. One of my friends who is this incredible life coach who I work with quite often says that a lot. She's like, oh, how human of you. Anyway, so how human of you to feel that way during a challenging time like this. We put together a set of resources to help you regain some spaciousness in your mind, to regain some balance in the way that you are thinking and feeling. And these are 3 to 5 minute exercises that you can do in the moment when you're feeling like you need it. If that sounds at all helpful, or if it sounds like something that someone you know might be able to use, you can find these resources at peakmindpsychology.com/support. If you put your email address in there, you'll get access to those 3 exercises, and you'll also get access to a wealth of other information and potential trainings and things that we put out to address concerns and needs that we see coming up in our community. So we would love for you to check that out, peakmindpsychology.com/support, and let us know how it goes if you use those resources. We would love to hear from you. You can either email us at info@peakmindpsychology, or you can find us on Instagram at peakmindpsychology. We're pretty easy to find. Okay, so let's dive in this week. I have Ashley here. Hello.
Hi.
She's
It's so
anxiously
funny.
sitting on the other side, and I'm just babbling over here, and she's watching me go.
I'm like, can I laugh? There were a few things you said that I wanted to crack up at. And then I was like, oh, but people don't know I'm here yet. So I'll just hold on.
She's lurking.
Oh man, it's
it.
funny. I mean, 'cause, you know, my day job, I'm a therapist, and the stereotype with that is, and how does that make you feel? And
Let's talk about your feelings.
right. And I've always prided myself on, I'm not that kind of a therapist. I'm not going to ask you, how does that make you feel? At least not very often. And yet the topics that we're going to talk about today, emotions, this is some of the most critical work. And it's something that comes up for everybody. And I know for me, on my own personal journey, a few years ago, when I really started to dive into the science of happiness, I decided, what's the point of life? Well, it's to be happy. And I'm a nerd, so I'm going to pursue that scientifically. And to your point about toxic positivity, what we really know is that you can't just be happy 24/7. It's not possible. And the pursuit of doing that actually has some really big problems. It will backfire on you. So I'm excited to get into it today so that everybody listening can kind of level up their emotional intelligence and have a really great understanding of what emotions are and why we have them and what to do with them and how to navigate them skillfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And something that I want to talk about as we dive in is this idea that, we all have a full spectrum of emotions that we experience that are very normal, very common. And a soapbox that we've been on in the past is that good and bad are not emotions. We actually have
Judgments.
They're judgments. They're not emotions. And a resource that I frequently push people toward is just to Google emotion wheel. You'll get a bunch of different images. Some of them are more comprehensive than others, but if you look at them, all of these images will have in common is it's going to be a big circle with like tiny little pie pieces carved in it. And each one of those tiny little pie pieces is an emotion that we can experience. And the more accurately you can label your emotions and understand them, the better off you're going to be, because you start to see the nuance among situations that you find yourself in and how that impacts you personally. There's a lot of other benefits you get from that. But with that setup, something I wanted to mention is depending on who you are, your background, the contents of your identity. And I'm going to focus on one factor in particular here, that is our gender. You may feel more compelled in the direction of believing that certain emotions are more appropriate for you to feel and express, and other emotions are less appropriate for you to feel and express. Have you noticed that with your patients, Ashley?
Oh, absolutely. It's the way we're socialized, at least in our culture, is that it's more okay for women to be anxious or sad. Men can be angry. And it's not okay for women to be angry, right? Then you get called the B word. It's so there are definitely some gender stereotypes here, and we're socialized in that way. And I mean, if you think about it, when you put that with a just be happy and don't be angry or don't be sad or don't cry, all of this messaging that you get from early in life, it's a wonder most people walking around are not very skilled in recognizing their emotions and dealing with them. You know, when you were talking about that feelings wheel, it made me think of some work from Brene Brown, who said the average person can accurately identify about 3 emotions: happy, sad, mad. I throw in 4th. I think people are often aware when they're feeling anxious, but that's also my bias, since that's what I specialize in. People recognize 3 or 4 emotions, but to truly be healthy and have to promote your well-being, you need to be able to accurately identify something that I think she says 29, 28, somewhere in there, right?
Multiples of 10.
Yeah, so many more. So look at that. And if you're one of those people who feels good, air quotes, or bad, you have 2 that aren't even feeling. So you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And something I want to unpack even further, as you were talking about, it's okay for women to feel anxious and sad. Men can feel angry. Obviously, we're making some generalizations here, but here's a couple of examples that may help drive that point home. For women who are listening, have you ever been in a situation where someone has made you so angry and your gut instinct was to cry?
Oh, yeah.
You started crying.
Oh, yeah.
Your mind will naturally push you in the direction in behaving in a way that you are accustomed to behaving, that is inside of all of your beliefs and upbringing and rules about what you should and shouldn't, can and can't, will and won't do. And for women, because it's so okay and acceptable for us to be sad, but not acceptable for us to be angry, that emotional expression gets sort of diverted into a more acceptable emotion. And you see the opposite with men. In a lot of cases, I actually dated someone in the past, man, we won't go there in too much depth, but who in sad situations would get very angry.
Oh, yeah.
Because sadness for him was not an acceptable emotion. And the same psychological mechanisms that push women to cry when they're angry, push men to get angry when they're sad, because it's just a more acceptable expression.
It's like everything gets kind of mixed up. And it makes me think of my little brother, who's very quick. His chain of events, it goes pain, mad. And I mean, if he stubs his toe, he's going to scream at the next person he sees, and it's instantaneous. And I'm like, he's going to kill me for saying that, but you need to work on this. He's gotten better. But it was interesting to see, whereas I would not react that way. And maybe we're just different people, but there's also, obviously we've been socialized differently because of gender. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this is complicated stuff that we're talking about here, but what we want to focus on with the rest of this episode is the importance of cultivating the ability. And maybe you can't do it today, and that's okay. There's a lot of reasons why, many we just mentioned, why it's difficult for people to either recognize or express a full range of emotions. But some reasons why it's important to do that and to go beyond that, why it's important to not avoid or try to push down emotions that we think are inappropriate for us to feel and express.
Mhm.
So we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 4. 4 key things that emotions do for us. And in particular, the more aversive, negative, bad, uncomfortable, those types of emotions are particularly impactful in this way. So 4 things that our emotions do for us that are important.
Yeah. So when I'm working with people in my practice, obviously we spend a lot of time working on this, and I like to start with, why do we have emotions? And very few people really have an answer to that question. And so I think it's such a foundational thing is to understand why we have emotions in the first place. And they give us messages. From an evolutionary perspective, this is one tool your brain has developed in order to give us a lot of information very, very quickly. So I like to think of emotions sometimes as when you get an email, they have a subject line that kind of tells you what the email is about. Emotions are like the subject line. They're like, hey, you're in this situation. Anxiety means danger. Guilt means you did something wrong. Sadness is you lost something that you cared about. Anger is something is not right. I don't like this. Shame is I am flawed or I'm going to be rejected. Embarrassment is they're going to judge me. Happiness is things are all good. Peace is I've got equilibrium. This is right for me. Don't change anything. Right. So I think that's such an important thing, because when you shortcut good and bad, you're missing out on a lot of that information. And instead, when we can start to understand emotions are messengers, it's just data. That's all it is, data coming in, right? So it's not touchy-feely. It's not a weakness. It's not anything. It's your brain processing and giving you really important information. Now, what you do with it's a different story. But I think that's such an important thing to really know and to be able to say, oh, I'm feeling that. Resentment means someone's taken advantage of you, right? Emotions come with a message, and getting clear on what that message is tremendously helpful.
Absolutely. So that first point was such a big one. Emotions give us information. Just to elaborate on that a little bit, lots of times we think of the emotion as the effect, right? We think about it as the thing that happens after. So someone did something, I feel angry, end of story. Or someone did something, or something happened and I feel happy. Something happened and I feel sad. There certainly is a chain of events, but to your point, that emotion isn't the punctuation mark. It's an input into what happens next and how we evaluate things next, how we may behave next. And that kind of gets into this second piece. So they give us information, but they also motivate us to act. They're a feeder into what happens next, which could be or is likely to be an action. Ashley, you had a really cool way of breaking apart the word emotion that I thought was really
and I don't remember where I got it originally, but it's, emotions motivate us to act. I mean, look at the word, right? It's emotion. It comes before the motion. So a lot of times I'll think of it as well, what's the emotion driven action here, right? So if you let your feelings dominate you. Now sometimes our emotions are very, very helpful, right? If you're driving down the road, a car pulls out in front of you, your anxiety system kicks in. So that's going to be that stomach drop, your heart pound, and that tension. And you hit the brakes because anxiety motivates us to avoid or escape, right? If you're feeling anxious in a social situation, you probably look down or cross your arms over yourself, or you leave. You make an excuse to leave, right? So anxiety comes with these urges to escape or avoid. Now, sometimes they're really helpful, sometimes not. And of course, as you build your emotional intelligence and your psychological strength, you can use the information and then decide whether or not you're going to act on it. But they motivate us to act, right? Anger, then that motivate you to like stand your ground, or like, I mean, I always think of mama bears, right? It's protect and defend. Sadness, it might motivate it that we cry or we withdraw or we isolate.
Mm-hmm.
So emotions come with these urges for action.
And we would miss out something that I want to highlight. If we avoid the experience of feeling those emotions, to your point, sometimes the urge that we get, that we call it inside some of our programs, and especially inside the Ascend program, we call it an action urge. The action urge you get is an extremely helpful one. And you may miss out on that information and that suggested action from your mind if you're working so hard to avoid feeling a certain way.
I want to get a little technical here too, if that's okay, because
go for
where
it.
also this can get a little bit twisted up is, let's say you have a natural reaction, you feel sad, but in your head, in your mind, sad is not okay, right? It's not okay for you to feel sad. So as soon as that sadness shows up, you have a reaction to it. So it goes, this is what I was talking about. My brother goes sad, mad, pain, mad. So you feel sad. Then your mind is like, sad is bad. You shouldn't feel that way. What's wrong with you? And then you get ticked. Then you have the urge, right? Because anger is going to come with its own action urge too. And that's how it could be. If you find yourself kind of confused, like, well, I probably should have felt sad in this situation, but I was like yelling at my kids. Because we have that first reaction, and when we judge, so we have reactions to our emotions. Does that make sense?
That makes beautiful sense.
Yeah. Or like people when they're anxious, and then it's like, oh, well, I shouldn't feel scared, or I shouldn't feel worried, I'm weak. Then they start to beat themselves up. There's a whole other emotion. So then maybe as they're feeling defeated or hopeless, then they go withdraw. Okay. That's where a lot of these unhelpful action urges come from. I think it's because we're kind of listening to the emotion that's
secondary.
Yeah. And it would be like, I don't know, spam mail or something. I was trying to tie back in
to your email.
Yeah, that's a flop. But it's like a distraction from, and this is where if you can get really tuned into what you're feeling. And that's, I think, where my mind kind of went here, April, is because you were talking about when you try to avoid or stuff it down, a lot of people do. And when you stuff down your emotions, really unhelpful things happen, right? It's like I always use the shoving a beach ball underwater metaphor. It takes a lot of energy. And at some point it's going to it's going to come bursting out of the water and bop you in the face. Or other people will use, like, think about shoving your emotions down. It's like a Coke bottle that you shake up. Then when you open it, it's going to explode.
And let's go there.
Yeah.
What causes that Coke bottle to open? What causes the beach ball to pop up? Typically, it's not you, right? It's not you intentionally sitting and thinking, I was really angry before, and now is an appropriate time for me to express that anger. That's not what happens.
Nope.
Our environment, another person, a conversation, something on TV, it triggers that emotion that we've stuffed down there and allowed to just gurgle under the surface, right? And so this can come out at unexpected, confusing, maybe inappropriate in the sense that, how did that trigger make me feel this way? Confusing ways that we just don't expect. So it'll come back, but it may come back in a way that now it's even harder to sort through.
Yeah. Or it's really outsized, right? Like if your kids do something really minor, but you've been like shaking up this Coke bottle, trying not to identify or experience your emotions, trying to like shove them away. And it comes out like, okay, maybe annoyance would have been ideal in that situation, would have made sense, but it came out like rage. And then what happens? Then you feel guilty.
Yeah.
Then you go down this beat, so it's really having a healthy relationship with your emotions is critical.
I want to take a quick diversion back to something we talked about last week. Last week, we dove into this concept of basically what we talked about was cognitive load. And at the time, I talked about it from the sense of creating more spaciousness in your mind, getting your to-do list off your mind, whatever. But cognitive load can come up whenever we're using our executive function, using our resources that we can control, anytime that we're taxing them. And when you're trying to stuff something down, you're trying not to feel something, you're taxing that cognitive load. And at some point, you're going to run out of it. And that's another one of those unexpected times when you can get angry or whatever. You're just mentally going to get tired. The end of the day will come. You'll be spent for the day, and that beach ball is going to whack you in the face.
That's such a good point. I mean, because it takes a lot of that sort of that prefrontal cortex, right? That intentional part to override the emotional system in our brain.
I mean, think about it. Has anybody made you really mad during a meeting at work and you sit there seething, but you sit there with like, okay, arrange your face in a facial arrangement that looks calm. Make yourself not look like a crazy person right now, but I'm really mad.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy.
It does. Oh, that's such a good point.
Okay. So we've talked about they motivate us to act. They give us information. One that I want to touch on that is important during this particular time that we're in with COVID. You know, we're all missing out to varying degrees on interpersonal interaction. And it can feel like we're disconnected from other people. But we have an incredible tool in our toolbox to remain connected to other people, and it concerns our emotions, specifically your ability to experience and use empathy, your ability to look at another person's situation and to some extent feel or understand what it must feel like to be in that position. And we're all in different flavors of difficult situations right now. And one way that we can stay connected to other people is to cultivate that emotional, empathetic connection through, I mean, something as easy as an outreach, thinking about people in your family. Like when I think about my family, my experience during COVID and during this time is with me and my husband, who's an ER physician. There's some complexity there. 2 very young kids, 2 and 4.5 years old. There's some complexity there, working from home. That's my situation. But you know what? I'm not lonely in the sense that no one's here. When I think about other family members, though, they are alone a lot of the time. So as I'm reaching out to them, the empathetic thing that I'm trying to do is think about what must it feel like to be in that situation day in and day out? And what can I do in this phone call to show, hey, I see you and I see what this must be like for you. And it's really helped relationships that I don't want to say they were strained before, but they weren't as tight before. In a time when we can't see each other, somehow that bond has tightened because we've had to be more empathetic.
That's such an awesome point to bring up, April, because you said that I see you. And that's such an important part, right? Like we have a basic need, like we need food, we need shelter, we need safety, and we need connection, right? And part of that's being accepted, that's being seen. And this is a really cool way. And I love how you're tying it in with emotions, because I mean, I got to be honest, when I think about, you know, I haven't seen my parents in ages. I haven't seen my grandparents in ages. And I want to. And when I think about friends I have who live alone, and when you really tap into that empathy, it's not a happy, fun feeling.
No, it doesn't feel good. No,
it's a painful feeling. And yet I would argue, you know, that it's good to feel that pain because it motivates you to reach out. And then it's had this effect of really deepening those relationships. And I think that's such a really cool way to hit home that point that emotions are important. All of them are important, and that they're not good and bad. Yeah. Some of them are more pleasurable. A lot of them are painful. I mean, humans, we have probably 2/3 compared to 1/3 of painful versus pleasant emotions. But that's normal and that's human. But this is a really neat way to say we can use our emotions to really connect with other people, to share pain, right? That's such a bonding experience.
This is going to sound so cheesy, but it is so worth it. I think it was a Pixar movie, Inside Out.
Yeah.
This is I'm sorry to ruin this for you. Spoiler alert, if you've not seen the movie and this is going to be a big deal for you, I would just hit the fast forward button a couple of times, go a couple minutes forward so you don't hear this part. But what that, film, it's basically talking about what goes on in our minds and our complex emotions and how they wrestle with each other. And there's these cute Pixar characters that each represent an emotion, but there's an emotion or a character called Joy, who represents joy. And then there's sadness, and she represents sadness, right? And this whole time it's Joy trying to keep sadness from being experienced. Like, she doesn't want the little girl whose mind they all live in to experience sadness. And what happens at the end of the movie is she experiences sadness, and her parents finally understand her. They connect in a way that they hadn't before. It deepens their relationship. It's a cheesy Pixar movie, but that's what happens with people. Like, deep connection about real problems and real struggles and real authentic emotion. Bonds are created that way.
Well, and we know the quality relationships are one of the biggest factors in well-being.
Huge.
So, and I got to say, when that Pixar movie came out, do you know how excited I was? Because I have been teaching kids, I have been using that framework for so long to teach kids about emotions and their brains. And then Pixar comes out and and kids are like, oh, you mean like Inside Out? I'm like, yes, thank you for finally putting something in the world that it's so good. But
my favorite part of that movie, P.S., is the little girl grows up and she gets to be, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13. And they get a new control board for her mind. And they're like, puberty? What does that button do? I don't know. It's probably not that important. I'm like, oh, it's so good. Anyway,
forgot about that
movie. Great movie. I watched it a lot, right, with the little kids.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that brings us probably to our fourth point.
Yes. Which is so important. Such an important one.
Emotions, what I really want you guys to take away from that is there are no good or bad emotions, but we need the full range of them. But here's a really interesting point is that emotions tell us what we care about. There's Steve Hayes, who is a leading psychologist right now, and was a guest on April's podcast last year. I think go back and listen.
I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at episodes while you talk.
But he has this saying of you hurt where you care and you care where you hurt. That they're two sides of the same coin. And I find myself, saying this to people a lot of the time when they're saying, well, I don't want to be sad about that, or I don't want to be worried about that. And I like to ask the question, okay, what would it mean if you weren't sad about that? It would mean you didn't care, right? The only way to not be sad about losing a loved one would mean you do not care about them. Do you want that? No. Or what would it mean if you weren't worried about this at all? If you weren't anxious about this project, it would mean you don't care. So love and pain, they go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. So many people go to so many lengths to avoid these painful, unpleasant, difficult emotions. But when you turn those off, you're actually diminishing your capacity for the good ones too, for those ones that we like to call good, right? If pleasant. You're going to turn off what?
The pleasant one, the favorable.
The pleasant ones, the enjoyable ones. You can't, all right, you guys, we like our research, and there's a lot of studies that show people who are experientially avoidant, meaning I don't want to feel this, get rid of it, whether that's substances, numbing, sleeping, shoving it down, whatever it is. I don't want to feel, just avoiding situations that make you feel that way. Also experience less joy and happiness in their lives. When something good happens, they have a momentary burst of happiness, but it doesn't last as long. What that means is if you want to have more joy, it comes at the cost of also having more pain.
I looked back, Dr. Hayes, his episode was 143. It was almost a year ago to this date. It was on October 9th, 2019. What I would encourage you to do is, even if you don't feel like these episodes, right? We're talking 45 minutes. You're spending a lot of time with us. Thank you, by the way. If you don't have time for another full length episode this week, I would highly encourage you to go back in your podcast app to episode 143, grab the bonus episode that I released with that one. So what happened during this interview, and this is why this point that we're making, that these emotions, particularly these more painful ones, tell us what we care about. We dove into that during that episode, and I have talked about a lot of stuff about myself. I have hashed my most difficult times in my life, both to all of you on the podcast, to therapists behind closed doors, to various coaches who have helped me along the way. I have talked about this stuff ad nauseum. So when a guest says, "Hey, April, can I lead you through an exercise?" I'm always like, "Oh yeah, sure, I can handle this," because I have trudged through the crud. I feel like I can handle myself professionally on a podcast episode while going through an exercise. And that dude leveled me because he had me go to a place where I experienced some of the most painful emotions that I've ever experienced. And basically what he said was that rip my heart out right now. Imagine you could write on one side of a piece of paper what those emotions are and the situation surrounding yourself having them. If you flipped over that piece of paper, what is that set of emotions telling you that you really want? And for me, that set of emotions was all around my dad dying, some PTSD that I had after having my first child. Like, a lot of stuff with that was wrapped up in abandonment. And I had never made the connection that if you flip that piece of paper over, I'm craving real connection to people that I trust. And I was like, boom, on the podcast. And so it was so moving, though, that I'm like, I literally can't even talk anymore. I don't even know what to do with myself. And he's like, yeah, sure, I do this to people all the time. So he's fine because he's used to this. But it was so impactful that is what's in that bonus episode. So I would urge you to listen to that and go through that exercise as though you are in my shoes and you're just taking his cues and visualizing what he tells you to. It will level you in a way that nothing ever has.
In a good way, though,
in the
right?
best way.
Because I really like to think, because that's important, right? Then you got really good information. Now you know what to do, right? And I'm assuming that's had some impact on your relationships and the way you approach them. And it's just, getting really clear on your emotions and what they're telling you, and that they're not bad. They might be difficult or painful, but they're not bad. They're important. And honestly, sometimes pain is good. I get pushback on that one too. People are like, pain is bad. And I'm like, well, what about after you work out and you're sore? And not like a good soreness, because you're like, I got stronger. So I'm assuming that you felt stronger after that experience with Dr. Hayes.
Completely.
Right?
And I hope that, I want to run through these one more time.
Okay.
But before I do, I hope that as you listen to this list, turn this into a bit of a framework for yourself. When you're in a situation where you're feeling some of these more unpleasant emotions and maybe feeling the urge to good vibes only it, or pretend like you're okay, or avoid, or, have a glass of wine, or whatever it is that you would do to not feel them, I want you to run through this list and just ask yourself, 1, what information is this emotion giving me? What is it telling me? I'm just going to say that I fall into the stereotypical, like, there's a lot of gender research again with women around stuffing down anger and having it not be okay. what happens to us is that we don't actually recognize that there was a need that wasn't fulfilled or there was a boundary that was violated. So I use that as an example because if you're feeling that way, take the information from it. Oh, interesting. I don't like it when people do that to me. I should put a boundary there. So what information is this emotion giving me? What is this emotion motivating me to do? How am I feeling like I want to act? What behaviors am I feeling urged to do? 3, is this an emotion that can help me connect to others? Is it one that might help me relate to another person's experience? Or is it one that is wrapped up in my relationship with someone else that we may be able to have a good conversation as a result of? And then 4, what is that emotion showing me that I actually care about? What's really important to me? If this emotion is true, which it is, there's no like objective fact to emotions. But if I acknowledge that I'm feeling this way, what's it telling me that I really and truly care about and value? Run through that rubric the next time you're feeling these unpleasant emotions and see if it's helpful.
Yep. Only thing on a parting note, I would say there's a saying, name it to tame it. Try to label your emotion. Don't use good or bad. Try to expand it. That's why that feelings wheel or wheel of emotions is so helpful. We want to be able to get the nuances, and that alone, I am feeling blank, can be a game changer.
I love it. You guys, I hope this was helpful as you think about situations that you encounter where you are feeling that full range of emotions. Again, going back to the resources that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. 1, Google emotion wheel. Get familiar with just the range of emotions that you can experience. Just reading through it is really a revealing exercise. So spend 5 minutes of your day doing something that's going to be really impactful. Just read through that list of emotions and see the full breadth of what is out there. We're remarkable, adorable animals that we have that much of an emotional experience. And 2, I mentioned that free resource at the beginning of the show. Please check it out or send it to somebody who you think might benefit from it. These are beautiful exercises that really will help restore some peace and spaciousness and balance in your mind. Again, that URL is peakmindpsychology.com/support, and it's in this episode's description. So you should be able to just swipe up on your phone and click on that link to get access. Thanks so much, you guys. I hope you have an amazing week. We have so much fun stuff coming. I can't even stand it.
I know.
I want to announce everything now, but I can't. So anyway, stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if, instead, you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so, but today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.